Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a fantastic show for you all today. When Ryan is in this chair, he usually does these kinds of sarcastic, like, we have a perfectly adequate show for you today kind of things. Maybe I'll start doing that.
Look, well, it's more than adequate today.
There we go, yes.
We have President Biden ditching Putin's price hike for ultra MAGA Republicans. We'll get into that new slogan with our panel. Plus, we'll dig into data from 2008, 2022 that breaks down how working class voters have drifted away from politics altogether, while more affluent voters have increased their sway toward the Democratic Party. And progressive congressional candidate Amy Vilela discusses her run for Nevada's 1st district.
But first, social media lit up yesterday after Elon Musk gave a lengthy interview with respect to former President Trump's Twitter ban. Trump is obviously permanently banned from Twitter at the moment. Financial Times' Peter Campbell asked Musk the big question, and let's watch the first part of his response.
Are you planning to let Donald Trump back on?
Well, I think there's a general question of should Twitter have permanent bans? And, you know, I've talked with Jack Dorsey about this, and he and I are of the same mind, which is that permanent bans should be extremely rare and really reserved for people where they're trying to, for accounts that are bots or spam scam accounts, where there's just no legitimacy to the account at all. I do think that it was not correct to ban Donald Trump. I think that was a mistake because it alienated a large part of the country and did not ultimately result in Donald Trump not having a voice. He is now going to be on Truth Social, as will a large part of the sort of the right in the United States, and so I think this could end up being, frankly, worse than having a single forum where everyone can debate. I guess the answer is that I would reverse the perma ban. I would say I don't own Twitter yet, so this is not like a thing that will definitely happen, because what if I don't own Twitter? But my opinion, and Jack Dorsey, I want to be clear, shares this opinion, is that we should not have perma bans.
And we're going to play another clip or two from that interview. He is representing Jack Dorsey's opinion correctly, because Dorsey chimed in later on Twitter and said that he did agree that it was not a right decision to permanently take Donald Trump off the platform. What do you think?
Yeah, if you think that Twitter is as important a public sphere as we've all been describing it as, then a permanent lifelong ban does seem pretty draconian. I don't know how I can really square some of my views about us needing to be in a less punitive society with a kind of permanent ban like that outside of accounts that aren't real, that are bots, that are there for the sole purpose of spamming and not contributing in any way to the platform. I think the other part that is frustrating about the Trump example is that the tweets that he allegedly was banned for don't necessarily seem to have any cognizable principle that supports the ban. You know, like, why these tweets? And I know that it was obviously in the context of 1-6, right, but the particular tweets that were pointed to were one tweet that said he wasn't going to the inauguration, and, you know, one kind of generalized tweet about, you know, people supporting him. And I think that if you're going to be instituting bans of any kind, including permanent bans, you'll encounter so much less pushback if there is a specific theory that gets you banned that people can anticipate and that can be applied consistently across the board.
He was clearly banned because of the attack happening on the Capitol, but his tweets were not the proximate cause of that attack. His actual words and his speech that he gave to people, I think you can draw a much more obvious connecting kind of line. But that speech was not on Twitter. That speech was legal. You might have said he should have been held morally responsible for it in terms of impeachment and that kind of thing. He wasn't. But it was not his speech on Twitter. So it's a little weird for them to punish him for that.
It felt a little like when someone doesn't win an Oscar for a great movie and then they just give it to them for jumping Jack Flash.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's like.
Well, Elon went on to say that permanent bans undermine trust in Twitter as a town square where everyone can voice their opinion, and offered a temporary suspension as an alternative.
It was I think it was a morally bad decision, to be clear, and foolish in the extreme.
Even after he egged on the crowd who went to the US Capitol, some of them carrying nooses, you still think it was a mistake to remove him?
I think if there are tweets that are wrong, they should, and bad, those should be either deleted or made invisible. And a suspension, a temporary suspension is appropriate, but not a permanent ban.
And actually, I saw people kind of jumping on that quote right there to say, oh, I thought he said that it's going to be a free speech platform. He's going to get rid of tweets that are wrong and bad. But that's with the full context of that remark, I think it's pretty clear he's saying by wrong and bad, he meant tweets that would have previously been deemed against the platform's rules that would have resulted in a permanent ban. And he's saying, well, no, maybe, at the least, instead of banning the person, we'll just do something about those tweets. Yeah,
there does seem to be something weirdly maximalist about banning the person. If it really is about those tweets, then let's take down the insidious tweets. It kind of gives the game away that it wasn't really necessarily about those tweets.
Yeah.
It was about losing out on the Oscar for The Color Purple.
Losing out on the Oscar. Yeah, so it does make a sense. And even, this is true on other platforms. So Zuckerberg, I think, has had some, I don't know about this permanent. So I think it's a 2-year ban on Facebook is what they've said. And they've said after 2 years, he might be coming back. I guess he might be back sooner if this Supreme Court of Facebook reaches a different decision. So if Facebook, interestingly, has this board that can overturn bans, just bans. This is interesting. I've learned this. They only weigh in when a piece of content is completely taken down. So if the piece of content is just turned down, they don't do anything. They don't weigh in. So actually the thing that most conservatives are most upset about, obviously involving Facebook and content moderation, is the Hunter Biden laptop story. That wasn't taken off Facebook. Its reach was just turned down, which is not a situation where the Supreme Court would rule in, which is an obvious issue with it that I've raised to them. But
yeah, the stories about Facebook's bad influence in all of these political spheres have been coming fast and furious over the last couple of weeks or so. I think we mentioned on the show that Bernie Deputy Campaign Manager Ari Rabenhoft recently wrote in his book that there was this meeting between the Senate campaign, the Senate office, and Facebook, where they basically told them that if he wanted to have good interaction on Facebook, if he wanted to have a lot of interaction, then they needed to just defer to Facebook around messaging issues, telling a sitting senator that we are going to control your messaging basically, or else no one is going to see it. And there was, Bernie apparently left the room, and there was a heated exchange between staffers, Facebook staffers and Bernie staffers over this issue, because you can see the democracy implications of all of this, not to mention the broader implications for various groups. And I think a lot of people on the left who might be kind of snarky or smarmy about the idea of Trump getting banned should really contemplate what will happen if there is ever a real, genuine leftist threat to the establishment that is on Twitter and having a lot of outreach on Twitter and effectively communicating with the public on Twitter. Because with standards as ephemeral as these, who knows what could happen to any of us?
Yeah. Well, Elon was also continued to be pressed on whether Trump would be banned again if he does something similar to the January 6th debacle. Here's what he said about that.
He has publicly stated that he will not be coming back to Twitter, and that he will only be on Truth Social. And this is the point that I'm trying to make, which is perhaps not getting across, is that banning Trump from Twitter didn't end Trump's voice. It will amplify it among the right. And this is why it is morally wrong and flat out stupid.
So look, I thought this, on the whole, his remarks here were very well considered and thought out and pretty persuasive to me. I hope everyone, who is so worried in sort of in the mainstream media, who's furious about Elon Musk buying Twitter, thinks this is going to be the end of days, that he's some far-right lunatic or something. I hope they would watch that and see that he's thinking through these issues, and he has a reason for his thinking that it should be more of a free speech platform, one that some of the previous leadership of the company shares. These are not crazy ideas to think that the former president of the United States should be able to use this, or it should, that if the platform thinks it's in the better interests of some kind of social goal to have people speaking, even if we don't like what they have to say, even if it causes people to react in some bad way, that really is kind of a fundamental sort of aspect of free speech, that we do not fear speech. We want speech to be heard because we don't, if you're so convinced that bad speech is just like going to win, so you have to silence it at all times, that you end up having like a very pessimistic view of human nature.
Yeah, well, I think that Musk's point about the balkanization of news, where people go into their individual silos, and the effect of getting Trump off Twitter is that Trump is still talking, but the broader public isn't really hearing him, and that could allow certain stuff to fester that we would like to be able to confront directly. I think that's a good point. However, the kind of ideological basis for thinking Trump should not have been banned aside, I also think we have to confront the reality that taking Trump off Twitter does seem to have had an effect on how much the journalist class, the liberal journalist class that couldn't help themselves but engage with him constantly on Twitter and write 50% of their news coverage, it seemed, on whatever Trump tweeted that day.
And they're salivating to have him back on.
Has been kept from doing so.
To have him back
his influence really was amplified significantly through Twitter, and that's not a reason to kick him off Twitter. But it is something for the media class who fed into that to really think about as they contemplate his return to, if not this medium, other similar mediums.
I think that's a fair point, but also he could, if he wanted to speak on, he could be on Fox every night, every day. He could be 24 hours a day. I'm sure if he wanted to talk to CNN, if he wants to talk to these people, he can. It's just his preferred medium for communicating was Twitter, and they took that away from him. So then he was like, well, screw you guys, I guess.
His marble to Michelangelo.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I look forward to your radar coming up next, Brianna.